interesting. Yeah, that's clever.
And if a sloth had made their way to the Middle East at the time of Jesus, maybe they weren't so slothful after all. They seemed
Yeah,
quite
that's true. So what
adventurous.
if we've been interpreting this all wrong from the get-go? Hey everybody, welcome. Today we are asking what it looks like to remove ourselves from the equation and ask who we're doing what we're doing for, rather than why we're doing it or how it makes us feel. So hope you guys enjoy this one, and see you soon.
But that idea of like, where is the line between like action and rest, and where do we begin saying no? Like, where is the line? I don't know if there's something in that just like relevant, topical with what's going on for you, and the insights that help you not to overload your plate. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good one. So like saying no, when to say no, and where would you draw the line? Yeah, because
Because
we're
I'm
also
probably at the other end where it's like I'm probably a little bit more struggling with that, like sloth. What's the word for it? Like sloth.
slothfulness. I don't know.
Sloth.
Slothery. Slothery. No, that's sloth aside.
Sloth. Sorry. Yeah, no, you're right. But I'm in Australia. I think it might be different in Northern Hemisphere. Slothfulness. Meaning. It's actually in the Bible. Wow.
Yeah,
Old mate JC was talking about slothfulness.
I thought that's where you were pulling from.
I rarely pull from the Bible.
Get thou off thine ass, thou sloth.
What the frick? Like, he was from the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
Where were the sloths at? How did they know to talk about slothfulness? Aren't they Latin American?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's clever.
And if a sloth had made their way to the Middle East at the time of Jesus, maybe they weren't so slothful after all. They seemed
Yeah, that's
quite
true. So
adventurous.
what if we've been interpreting this all wrong from the get-go?
Look, all signs are pointing in that direction from where I'm standing.
Yeah,
Slothfulness is the state or habit of being lazy, idle, and disinclined to work or exert oneself. Biblically, wow, okay, it's like maybe it's a modern interpretation. Maybe sloth didn't make it to the Middle East.
No, it's definitely a King James version.
Is it?
Yeah, 100%. So that would be like 16 or 1700s was King James translation. Maybe it was 1400s. Not sure. I have to check on that.
So they'd made it to Latin America at that time,
Or maybe the English would have traveled, had enough data. So they obviously interpreted the Hebrew writings. So maybe that was their translation, and one of those guys had made a trip to the Amazon. I don't fucking know.
What I do know is that sloths are a really cool animal, and their personality should not be just, I don't know, I feel like they get a bad rap. They're just hanging out. Maybe they've got it all figured.
That's true. And they actually adopted that mechanism. They evolved that mechanism out of strategy, right? Because everything's moving so fast in the jungle, and so if you go slow enough, you fly under the radar. That's the whole thing.
Is that legit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Far out. I'm just talking shit, and you're like, actually.
Let me tell you about my rainforest expertise.
Well, let's define this before we really dive into the Amazonian ecosystem. Sloth is the culpable lack of physical or spiritual effort. The Book of Proverbs extensively critiques the sluggard or the sloth, described as someone who is slack in his work and a brother to one who destroys. Sloth is not just laziness, it is spiritual indifference that leads to lukewarmness.
Mm-hmm.
It is a sin of omission, knowing what is right but failing to act. Knowing what is right but failing to act.
Ooh,
yeah, that's probably that last bit hits the hardest, I think.
Yeah.
The Bible warns that laziness leads to poverty, hunger, and ruin. The Bible calls for diligence, hard work, and in the case of something, working without needing a supervisor. So I guess like intrinsic motivation. But yeah, knowing what is right but failing to act. And that's probably the crux of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like when we're at a point where we're like, and that's maybe where excuses come in, because we know what we should be doing. We have enough resources to take at least the first step, but then we don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the defining bit. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me, and I know we talked about this the other day, but many a misstep was taken by standing still. Yeah. It's like there was another one. It's along the lines of not all action leads to somewhere, but inaction always leads to nowhere, something like that.
I love how you drop these quotes and you're like, you get it bang on, and then you're like, or something like that. I don't really know. Just like put some cinematic music over that, and then just like cut to you being like, or something like that. I'm not really sure. I can't remember exactly. But what I can tell you about is the sloths in the Amazon jungle.
Yeah. Yeah. So welcome everybody. We're talking about sloths today. Yeah, that's so hard. It's actually a hard one. I've tried that one before. I can't. I'll laugh too much. I can't do it right now.
Have we ever heard David Attenborough laugh? I'm not sure.
I don't know. But you know what we could do for the intro for this is we can use 11 Labs to clone Attenborough's voice, and then we can just do our intro with Attenborough.
Yes. And we'll make sure to cut this bit out so that they think it was actually you doing an impersonation.
That's right. It's totally me.
Yeah, right. No, I think this is good. So how do we know when we're being a sloth and not resting? Because it's like, I feel like it's a popular idea now to take rest and like self-care, and it's okay to slow down, and like some of those like toxically masculine traits of working ourselves into the ground in order to achieve a goal, an outcome, or provide, or all of that pressure that we put on ourselves. And it's like, actually that's when it gets to a certain point, it becomes harmful, right? As does anything. You take it to the extreme, it can become harmful. But how do we know when we're taking it too far the other way? And is it just coming back to that when you know what to do, but you don't do it?
Yes, so I think there's a fine line there that one we have to be pretty mindful of, because you mentioned the going beyond our capacity, but I think the reality is in so many ways we're nowhere near our capacity. We just have so much other psychological drama, and so we've come to think, both from external sources and also from the internal, that our capacity, particularly as men, is so much lower than it actually is. And if you think about our forefathers, our grandfathers, our great grandfathers in World War II. I mean, those guys, what they went through, what they did, was exponential on a physical and emotional level, exponentially beyond what most of us do today. And that was how they lived. That's what they did. And I think that would be such a disservice, not only to them but also to ourselves, if we were to assume that the way they lived, the way they acted, was quote unquote toxic, which frankly I think is bullshit. So if we were to, in that light, we realize that the capacity of men is just looking 1 to 2 generations back, the swing on a physical and emotional and psychological level, if we just take an average of society today, is just so vastly different. So I think the real question is like, where did we shift, or where did we lose the knowledge and trust in our own capacity? Like, why are we so broken down today, rather than pushing beyond the limit? Because I think so much, just to throw in one last piece, I think so much of the time when we think that we're done, we're wiped out, we're broken down, it's not that we physically or mentally are. It's just a belief we have, and it's bad data. It's bad code coming from something. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's such, as you said at the beginning, it's such a fine line to know, because ultimately there is a point somewhere right? Where it's time to
Yeah.
step back. You mentioned something in there like doing what is necessary, and I think there might be something in that, right? Like back in the times of the wars and whatnot, like there was more that was maybe absolutely necessary that took them to that next level and gave them that additional strength to kind of persevere through
Mm.
those challenges because it was necessary and the stakes were high. And if they didn't do what they did, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, sure.
So then what are we deeming absolutely necessary in our
Mm.
lives? And I wonder if that necessity, like what are we actually placing value on and importance, and what are the stakes? Because if
Yeah.
we say that everything is important, then we're just going to burn out. So how do we filter down to say, well, this is the thing that's going to win the
Mm.
war, or like, you know, win the battle, or like to put it in that light? So I think maybe it's something to do with necessity. It's like, well, are we just being told in today's world that everything's important because that's the way the world runs, and when something's important, we invest time, energy, and money into it, and then
Yeah.
ultimately it's not fulfilling, and then we crash. So how do we pull ourselves back from that to find and determine what's important for us to
Mm.
then move forward with real necessity, not society's version of necessity?
That is a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point because, and you know, it highlights something. Just last night, I was telling you I was pretty run. I felt pretty run down, and then I realized like I had all this psychological stress, or I was feeling this tension, and then I realized the only thing that was making me that actually was generating the tension was the idea that I had to complete X projects on this deadline. And that if I didn't, it was going to be this massive issue, whether that was critique from external, from a person, or it was just a failure to meet an arbitrary goal that I had set for myself. And I was just in that moment, it's like all of the stress is just dependent on that one thing. It's just the value that I'm giving to these things that I quote unquote must accomplish. So yeah, so like what are the things that we are saying are necessary? You know, it's a brilliant. The reason that's such a good point is because the more things that don't matter that we tell ourselves do matter, then the less focus and energy we have for the things that actually do matter. And we get, but it's so easy to get lost and we lose, you know, the forest for the trees. Um, I think on the surface level, like we'll have to dive into this deep, but I think the surface level is turning inward. So like it seems generic, but it's like if we just sit still and we turn inward and we stop looking at the things externally and we look inward, then even if we are still, you know, aware of the external things, we start to give it context, right? Because if we can just create a little bit of space between all of those ideas or projects or just code that we're running in the mind, if we can create a little bit of space between those things and between the self, like what we actually are, it gives us an opportunity to observe them. And some of the things we may decide that they are important to us. It gives us the opportunity to actually choose rather than just being stuck in the default. So I think that would be the first step, is that coming into stillness. And that can be physical, but it can also be just it's multifaceted. It's definitely partly physical, so that might be getting into a dark, quiet space, but um, it's also mental, spiritual, psychological, and so that requires definitely a practice of some form. I would obviously, as you know, I would go to meditation for that. Some find it quietness in other practices, prayer and other practices, but I would, for me, I go to meditation, and I think it, in any way you look at it, it starts there because we can't take action from anywhere except within the self. But yeah, that's what I think is the first step. What do you think? How would you build off of that, if you agree?
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's, yeah, like I guess intentional stillness, because obviously if there's a lot to do, you know, like I don't know, did the people in the wars be like, hang on a minute, not quite sure if this is the right thing to do, let me just like meditate on it, you know, like when it feels like there's such urgency and necessity,
point.
like how do we carve out that stillness? Just like thinking about it from a practical point. I mean, we're blessed with so much luxury to have the time to
Yep.
kind of pull away and to sit in silence and really to kind of reconnect with our higher self and reconnect to that clarity and that clarity. I mean, that's what meditation brings me, you know, like there's that point, and I'm curious to hear like what your meditative practice brings up. But sometimes I'll go in with such a busy mind, and you're sitting there, and for the first 28 minutes of your 30 minutes sitting there, the mind's bouncing around and it's thinking about everything, and you don't realize that it's wandered until you kind of think, oh man, like what, like just come back to the breath, like come back to the sensation. And then suddenly it all disappears, and then it's the opposite. Then a thought comes into mind, and you're like, I wasn't thinking. Like now I'm thinking. Like where was I if I wasn't thinking? So it can be both, but like, yeah, those times of just space, I think it just relaxes the nervous system. When the nervous system is relaxed, then we have those clear ideas, and we have that understanding of what's really important. But how do you think we do that when it feels so chaotic? Because I know there's a quote, and you're much better at remembering quotes specifically than I am, but there's an expression that's like, you know, the more I have to do today, the more time I'll spend in prayer.
Yeah.
I think there was some like religious figure or something said that. Archbishop, maybe. But yeah, it's like we feel like that if there's so much on our plate, we need to sacrifice all of these foundational practices that make the work easier. But we kind of get caught in this, well, I've got 25 hours of work to get done today, so I just need to start now. But actually spending that little bit of extra time getting clear, maybe the way becomes clearer. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think there's two paths we can go with that same thing, because both are relevant in different contexts. So one of them is how do we basically come to ourselves, or how do we find ourselves when there truly is no option? We're in the battle, we're in a high stakes situation, and the only other option, let's go to an extreme and say the only other option is death, right? So we're in battle, physical battle in some capacity. I suppose the one way to look at that, and there's others who have direct experience in this, who would answer this much better than I, but I think one question one can ask themselves in any high stakes scenario is why they're doing what they're doing. And this only takes a moment. And so why am I actually doing this? And if it's for someone else, and if it's for someone you care about, and you know that you're fulfilling a need, then you can come to the fact that you don't have to, again, we talked about this before, but we don't have to necessarily know. If we know it's good, if we know what we're doing is good, you know, it's going to take care of this person we care about, or it's going to help this person in need, or it's a conflict and we're saving lives, then that's, I think, enough. I think it's always enough to know just why we're doing it. And so to ask that question, who am I doing this for? And if and it's such an easy, simple thing, because if you know right away, if you're just doing this to fulfill like some vain desire or whatever it might be, and then it just evaporates, right? Like in that instant, you could literally be like, okay, I have no reason to be here. You can turn around and walk out. Or if it's high stakes, you're gonna come back to your purpose for doing the thing. And most of the time, anyone who's asking themselves this type of question in that type of scenario has most likely entered the conflict or the situation with good intent. And if they haven't, then by the time they're asking this question, the gears are turning for change for sure. Now, the opposite of this is when we're in day to day, and like you said, we've got 25 things on the calendar in the same day, and we're running in all these directions, and it feels like we have no choice, but the reality is we totally have a choice. And I think it's most of us are in this place as a society. If you're productive, then you get to this place where you just have all this stuff going because it kind of becomes default if we're not approaching it mindfully. And I think if that's the case, it's got to be a really hard reset, and it's going to be a tough one because we're going to have to tell people, explicitly, hey, I've overbooked myself. I'm going to have to cancel this, or hey, I overbooked these projects. I'm going to have to give you a refund, or whatever the thing might be. And they're really uncomfortable staying in the same place. Ultimately, will be so much more uncomfortable. So I think in this scenario, it's a hard shift where we find out what we really want and what we really need to do, and realizing that it's just not sustainable, and coming back to balance. And even if it means we start from zero and we just start rebuilding our functioning model, how we function on a day to day, how we function in the world. But both cases come from that turning within. And the thing is turning within isn't only a physical, like we said before, it's not only a physical activity. If you're in war and you happen to have the, again, you mentioned luxury. If you happen to have the luxury to ask why you're there, why you're in that place, it can happen in a moment. Just asking who you're doing it for, what your reasoning is, and it can be enough. You don't have to know who you are, or all these arbitrary ideas. If you just know what needs to be done. I don't know. Those are a couple of different angles for different scenarios. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the like I wrote that down, like who am I doing this for? And I think a lot of the time it's like we ask like what am I doing? We ask why am I doing this? Or like why is this important? Um and well, not to speak on anyone else's behalf, but like for me, asking that question like who am I doing this for
Yeah,
is not one that I ask enough. I'm honest. I get stuck on the why, like what does the journey look like strategically? It's like, what are the steps, and does what I'm doing now align with the steps? And sometimes if I can't see the path, then I just get stuck at the start line because I
yeah,
need to kind of know where. We bring in another W, like where is this leading?
yeah,
And I end up just being that sloth because I'm like, well, I can't see the path, so I'm just going to wait until the path reveals itself. Um, Forgetting that there's actually people here and on the way who need me, but
yeah,
I'm not thinking about them. I'm just thinking about me. So I wonder if there's that like
yeah,
de-identification with the self, or like on the flip side, and just jump in at any point. But it's like, who am I doing this for? Is it okay to be doing it for me? Like, is that enough of motivation, or do you really think that service element and that selfless element is the key?
I think that when we remove the self from the equation, we actually become our best self, paradoxically. And it's that devotion, that the idea of devotion, of ultimate giving. And it reminds me too of our grandfathers, our forefathers, who have been in these conflicts, these battles, these wars. It was always for someone else. It was always for whether that was country, whether that was their family. It was mostly for family, for friends, for country. And then they did whatever it took to achieve that end, and that demanded they be at their best. But it also forged them into being their best. And it came from that ultimate sacrifice, or the willingness for the ultimate sacrifice, and just throwing all of ourselves 100% into a thing. And it can start so small, right? Like it can be the simplest act of kindness. It could be in community, it could be for family. Um, and now, because our reach is near infinite with the internet and the people we can communicate with, we can touch, we can reach in some capacity. um, yeah, there's so many directions we can start in pretty easily. We just pick a direction and we go. Um, and then that'll start to evolve. As long as the intent is there to do for others, then the universe just starts opening doors. Even if we've taken the wrong door, then it will open the next one, and it'll light the way. So there's a trust element in there too. but yeah, I think the removing the self from the equation, and it solves so many problems. Insecurities and all of this stuff goes out the window, because as soon as we say, no matter what I am or what I have, I'm going to give all of it for someone else, or for others, for my family, for community, for the world, for who fill in the blank. Um, as soon as that happens, then yeah, it's just incredible to see how others have done this, and they put themselves aside, and yeah, doors start to open. That's what I think.
How does that show up for you in your day-to-day life? Because you were talking earlier about how much you have on your plate. Like, where does that thought come into your mind, throughout your days in terms of doing it for other people?
Yeah. So a couple of places. I'll give a quick example. So, well, actually, let me circle back to that. So it's a practice too, because I'm by no means in any way an expert at it. In fact, I think I've been getting distracted from that idea and just focusing on the arbitrary goals of complete a project, or check off my to-do list type thing, and then it loses focus. But when it shows up day to day, I think it can be, if perhaps it once in the morning, once in the evening, or just once in a day, we just ask that question, who am I serving, or who am I doing this thing for? It just puts it in context. It's a simple question, but it puts it in context, and then it starts to at least provide us with the information on decision making, because then things start popping up, and if we're running it through the filter of who am I doing this for, then it's easier to weed out the stuff to say no to. It's easier to say no to those things, because we know that the ultimate good we can do is going to be from this one thing rather than these five things, and so it makes it an easy choice. And then the example I was going to give is like with work. I've been working on this new business model, and was trying to get customers, trying to get leads, doing all these things. And then I had a friend in need. He is dealing with a intense situation. And so I mentioned, hey, let me do some organization for you on that. I can use this tool that we've been developing, and, clean that up for you. And so he's like very grateful. So I did that. And then I set all of my other projects aside and just really did it for free, and just like, yeah, let me help you with that. And then it was a distinctive shift, because I saw he was in need, and then just knew I had some small thing to offer, because it was small, but I knew I had some small thing to offer. And then from that encounter, it just opened so many doors, not just working with him, but working with other people who were connected to him, and then referrals and all these things. And it was really encouraging and helpful to see. Again, that's a recent example, just a small shift of like just being willing to give whatever we have and take the leap, and then things start to change a little bit. But back to your question on everyday practice. I don't know, maybe it's something like, every morning you ask yourself that question: what am I doing today, and who am I doing it for? Yeah, what do you think?
There's a book that I unfortunately don't have on the desk here with me. It's called High Performance Habits, and it's by a US, I think, based life coach. I think it's one of the most in-demand coaches in the world, Brendan Burchard. Anyway, I'm not really a fan of his style. It's a bit kind of that old school Tony Robbins seminar, bloody, high energy kind of vibe. But anyway, take all that aside, the book's actually really practical and actionable. And one of the chapters is on raising necessity, which
Yeah.
goes back to our earlier point. But one of the questions in that, in terms of how can something be absolutely necessary, or why is it necessary? The question to ask is, who needs to be on my A game today?
Yeah.
Like stepping up. It's like, someone's counting on me. Who is that person?
Yeah.
Like, and how am I showing up as the best version that I can be today for that person? And I think it's just such a powerful question, because often, yeah, it's like, we get stuck, we get in our own way, but it's like, well, my teammate over there or my partner or my colleague or whoever, like they need me on my A game today for whatever reason. And I just love that question, like who needs me on my A game?
Yeah.
And again, it's just, moving away from the focus on ourselves, right?
Hmm.
So like, do you see a theme of, or do you see any moments in your life where that comes up? It's like you have that specific person in mind or that specific, I mean, you kind of hinted at it, but like, what would your answer to that be this week? Like, who needs you on your A game?
Yeah. Yeah. It's most of the time it's Linda, my partner. I always come back to her first because she's the closest person to me, and the one, the person I care about most in the world. And so that's an easy place to start, and then it just cascades from there. And so I think it is that simple, right? Like we just ask we can ask that question about the closest person to us, even if it's not family, even if it's not a romantic relationship. It's we're all around someone to some degree, even if we're highly isolated. We have connections to someone in some capacity, and so I think that's a good place to start. And you mentioned I really like something, or I like a connection to what you said, which is who needs me at my A game. It's also relevant just who needs me to show up because we're even not at my A game, like who just needs me to be there. And because we have this romanticized idea that like we should always be feeling 100%, we should always be on our A game, we should always be at our best. But the reality is we're very rarely at what we perceive as our best, but the difference is showing up. And so because showing up at 10% is infinitely better than not showing up. And so when someone, so then, when we remove the self from that equation, it's like if I stop trying to feel 100% because it makes me feel good and I just show up for X person, that's that's progress. Then you make a difference. And then slowly but surely that 10%, 20% becomes 100% over time. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I think, that's how I'm kind of thinking about it. What do you think?
Yeah. 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 And it's, yeah, because I guess, yeah, you're right. Like to challenge that initial question, like the A game, like the A game changes day to day, like
Yeah.
what that is you can provide. And the A game could just be getting on the field and, like, and it's consistency. Like everything will always come back to consistency. You do one thing amazing one day and then you don't show up for the next week. It's not going to move the needle and progress you. And even just thinking about that, and whoever's listening can do their own research because I'm not going to get it right. But it's something around like the outcomes of children, and you don't have to be the best parent. You really only have to be an average parent, or you only have to be there like quite a low percentage of the time for them, and that's enough to have an impact on their emotional well-being in the long term. But if you're fluctuating from availability to complete absence, it's like that's where the child's going to be confused. You just kind of have to be mediocre for them to be ultimately mediocre too. But like, you know what I'm saying.
I do.
Consistency and taking the pressure of having to be this like or maintain this aspirational standard for ourselves. It's like sometimes just be there,
Yep.
be a presence in the lives of the people who need you.
Yeah. Well said. I think a large amount of people would be surprised how much of a difference it makes if you just show up and trust yourself. That's it. Just show up, know that you'll do what you need to be done, know you'll do what needs to be done, and yeah, you can. Yeah, that's it goes very far.
Yeah. Well, I think we've stumbled on a lot of gems there. Any final thoughts or takeaways or connections to leave the listeners with?
No, I would just ask anybody who how ask anybody to post in the comments their best way or favorite way to bring it back into context when it comes to giving to others. Ask one simple question they may ask themselves on a day-to-day basis. Because I think you summed it up nicely.
Yeah, no, good shout out on that, because we don't have all of the answers. This is just from our experience, right? I wish we did have all of the answers. Made the builder, so it would mean but drop any comments, thoughts, questions down below, and until next time, ciao for now.